Hello. Hello, everyone. How are
Hello.
you?
We're good.
Fabulous.
Good, good, good. Well, tonight, Donna, we have a very, very special guest, another episode of a conversation about race from a mother's perspective. We have another special guest with us tonight, which we're very, very excited about and a little related to, I would say, since we all somehow,
Ah,
some way have found ourselves on the Northeastern University campus at one point or another.
mm-hmm.
But Naomi Thompson is here with us, and we'll obviously let her tell our audience a little bit more about herself. But from our perspective, Naomi is a lawyer, a very successful lawyer, and also is an officer for diversity and inclusion at several nonprofits and universities, including Northeastern, which is where her and I met when I was coaching at Northeastern. It was very good to see another Black sister on campus. So, we connected right away from across campus. And I actually followed her to Rhode Island because after she left Northeastern, she went to Rhode Island, and so did I. And again, we saw each other from across the campus, and I said, "I know you." And she goes, "Yeah, we met at Northeastern." So, and Donna obviously went to Northeastern University. So we all have that Husky connection, and
Yay.
it's it made us got us all the way here to this conversation about race. But we really want to hear from Naomi because I think her position is very unique, one that's definitely needed in a lot of businesses and universities, and now even athletic departments are having a position like yourself to just make sure that everyone is staying pretty much in compliance with diversity and inclusion issues within their organization and campuses. So we'll let you talk a little bit more about it, but welcome to our show. Obviously, I'm Dania, and obviously you've met Donna. Donna, do you want to just say anything a little bit about what we have planned tonight?
I just think it's going to be a very interesting conversation because I have never spoken to someone who does what you do, and I can't wait to hear about it.
Great, great. Well, Naomi, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and a little bit of background and how you got into the career that you're in today?
Wow. So when I was thinking about this in preparation, and I'm sure this is another question, but I would say that social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion is in my bones. It's in my genes. And when I say that, I come from parents. My mother and father were definitely activists in their own right in their youth. So my mom very, very proudly still has the pins from the campaign, but she worked for the campaign for the first Black woman to run for president of the United States of America. And she
Wow.
tell you, yes, that she worked on the campaign for Shirley Chisholm back in the 70s. And my father, when he was in the military, before he married my mother and had us kids, he was stationed in Montgomery, Alabama, and would walk from the military base to Dr. Martin Luther King's church, and he would volunteer to teach Sunday school there. And so they have a very rich beginnings, even before they met each other, dedication to social justice. And then in my deeper ancestors that go back to the Cape Verde Islands, my mother's last name is Cabral, and Amilcar Cabral was a liberationist, and he liberated the African islands of Cape Verde from the colonial rule of Portugal. And so, that's going way, way, way deep, not necessarily my resume. If you want to know a little bit about me and my education and my career path.
No, but this is actually good because it just tells everyone how deep rooted your passion is for social issues and racial issues. And it's just not a job. It's just not something you go to work to do every day. It's been a part of your upbringing and your fabric since you were young. And I think that's great for everyone to know that that's where that passion stems from.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So now you do have a son. Benjamin is 23 years old. Can you tell us a little bit about Benjamin?
He's my heart. As a mother,
yes.
You just love them. So Benjamin, he too followed me to URI. He is 23 years old now, but he went to URI for 4+ years. And, he's still trying to work on finishing his degree. And I'm confident as a mother that he will do that. But now he is working while he finishes up his degree. And I think he was an econ major. And he has aspirations of applying that. And hopefully he'll make lots and lots of money and help his mother out. But he's a brilliant, kind, gentle soul. And every day he gets up and he goes off to work for a subcontractor at Bain Capital. And so that's pretty exciting. And he's getting wonderful exposure and on, site learning there. So he's doing really well.
Great.
I want to know.
Great. Good. Now, tell me a little bit more about your parents, because obviously they were very influential, back in the days. Did they have conversations with you as a little girl about what was going on in the world when it came to, racism how prevalent were those conversations in your household?
I'm not sure whether they talked it so much, but we lived it. And so so when I was, kind of thinking about this conversation, I thought about that. And the things that I remember as far as building a foundation around social justice is very young. I think my brother might have been in elementary school, and I'm 2 years younger than him. We were involved in the NAACP. My mother was very active in the NAACP. We were involved in the youth chapter of the NAACP. I remember going with my brother. I think he was more gifted than I was, and he was an artist, and he went to AXO. And I don't know whether you know what AXO is, but it's like NAACP sponsors an Olympics of the mind. So it was promoting this intellectual exchange, and, he got on a bus and went off somewhere, and he brought his sculptures and artwork. And so, I think about, the church that we went to. It was a socially minded church, and the community that we lived in. And so it was not like they sat down and said, this is what race is all about, but they lived it. And so I was thinking about my grandfather, who originally worked in Boston, but then he moved the family back to the Cape. And he was a farmer, but he fed everyone. So we lived, we kind of characterize these things as like hunger issues or food insecurity issues. And he would feed his 10 children and his 20 grandchildren and everybody and anybody who would come to the table. And then if you needed food out of his garden, he would, pull the corn and the onions out with the dirt on it and put it in a bag and give it to you so that you can eat, organic food from, from the garden. So I think it was more in the way that we lived than there being a particular agenda, and the way that, my parents just got engaged the world and got involved in the world. But I remember my grandmother was a Garveyite too. And so, there would be posters in my grandmother's house of, Marcus Garvey, and we would have the old school, Black is Proud with a little baby with a big afro on. And so there was always affirmation of being Black was a good thing, something to be proud of. But, it came with good and bad. And actually, this is how far back it goes, probably to when I was a baby. My father used to work for the telephone company, and they did a movie called Something That Is Real, and actually took it from his house. And it was about the experiences of Black people, just his day-to-day existence back in the early 70s. And so it was always something that we just lived and was part of our, existence. But it's a very powerful movie, and he has this great line in it. He's like a 20-some-odd-year-old version of my dad, and he's like, being a Black man in America is like having leprosy. And I was like, oh my God. And it's like, wow. People, back then just didn't want to touch you. And so but the first scene is awesome. He comes in with a horse, and my brother is 2 years old, and he's riding on it. So this very masculine, very powerful image of my father, but his experience as a Black man growing up, existing in America was not always easy.
Are your parents still alive?
Yeah, my mom's in the next room.
Okay. And your father, how old are they?
Both of my parents are currently 83 years old.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wow. Oh, so that's really interesting, and you brought home a really good point, because I grew up in a very diversified environment, and it wasn't spoken about; it just existed.
Mhm.
And so I totally can understand that. You lived it; you didn't talk it; you lived it. Yeah. In fact, I just want to make one little comment. My sister was the only white girl in her classroom. And she even had a teacher of color. So we really grew up in a very different environment than most white people do, I think. So I get it. Tell us about
yeah, that's what I was going to ask Donna.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. You're at the Home for Little Wanderers, which is, that's a very heartfelt place for me. But tell us about what you're doing there for them.
So I lead their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I am the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've only been there 7 months. And so I've had a wonderful, interesting charge in that when I first got to the home, my job was to assess the climate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I did 3 fascinating things. I created a survey that I disseminated to the entire workforce to ask everybody if you could just give us your voice as to what you perceive are the issues and concerns. And then I went around to the workforce with selected people from the senior leadership, middle leadership, frontline workers, and asked them a series of questions about what they perceived as challenges relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what they proposed as solutions. And then I met with some focus groups. And so after about 3 or 4 months of collecting data, there's about 200 people who responded to the survey, a little more than that, who I spoke to on one-on-one or in face-to-face. This is the time of COVID-19. So a few individuals I did meet by going out to the various different work sites, but a lot of them were on Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams meetings. And what I did is, after I collected all of that data, I looked at best practices and called upon my 20 years of experience in doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I pulled together a draft strategic plan that looked at particular areas relative to the workforce with respect to recruitment, retention, and climate. So how many people of color are you bringing in, and where are they? So, when you look around, do you see diversity? Do you see diversity at certain levels of the organization, or is it all throughout the organization? And how are people experiencing their work? Are they staying? Are they coming and saying, oh, this is not the place for me? And are they, leaving soon thereafter? So that's the retention piece, because you can attract talent into an organization, but if you can't keep it, that's another issue, and it could be a very costly issue for an organization. And then the climate, like, what are the pictures on the wall? How do people feel when they come into an organization? What pronouns are used to address a particular individual? What language? How are you mentoring people? How are you cultivating talent? How are you promoting people? How are you paying people? How are you treating people in the workplace? And so collecting all that data and saying, there is always room for improvement. My mother always says the biggest room in the house is the room for improvement. And so trying to find
I like that.
Where there is room for improvement, and kind of identifying goals, initiatives, but being really specific, because in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, it's not just about being nice to people or, on an individual level, but how do we address the structural inequalities that exist and dismantling them, dismantling the barriers. And so the next step is like implementation, so that we can begin to break down the barriers that get in the way of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. But then we're also looking at how does that translate into serving the clients that are in the Home for Little Wanderers in a more effective and efficient way. And so when you have the majority of your clientele are people of color, maybe more than 85% of the population, are you equipped to serve them in an empathetic, in an understanding, in a way that is you can effectively communicate with them with respect to language if you don't have the right people in the right places. So it's been a busy 7 months. And we're continuing to tweak, adjust the strategic plan and be preparing to roll it out. And there are a lot of things that we're already doing towards that already.
So in your experience, because it sounds like, you've been at Northeastern, you've been at URI, now you're here. And I'm going to guess you've done a lot of other things too. What's the number one thing we're doing wrong in our institutions?
I wish that there was only one thing.
Okay.
Good answer.
Okay.
But I
give us a top three.
See, because to me, I would think be inequality in pay. And, I can just think a bunch of things right off the top of my head, but I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, so I mentioned recruitment, retention, and climate, and there are a lot of subcategories underneath that. But most organizations, if you look at them, depending upon what the organization is, they might have diversity. They might have people of color in different places. But if you look at where they're placed, most organizations, when you look at the C-suite, when you look at the top of the organization, regardless of what they do, regardless of whether they're making widgets or money or serving people of color, they're mostly white at the top. 85, 90, 100%, and the C-suite will be all white. And the higher paying jobs, the jobs that have the title, the jobs that have the power, the decision making, those that determine, and even many of the boards. And then, when you go to the lower parts of the organization, the lower paying jobs, the harder, the jobs that require more risk. I mean, we're seeing this all with COVID-19. Who has to go to work versus who can stay home and in their comfort of their house with pajamas from the bottom down, wearing slippers, and calling all the shots. But you don't have to get your hands dirty. You don't have to risk dying from COVID-19, and taking home 6-7 figure salaries easily, where people working minimum wage have to risk their life to take public transportation to a job where they're risking their lives facing the public and not being paid well. So I mean, for me, that's really kind of the number one, like recruitment, like who are you recruiting into your organization and where are you placing them? And I think often organizations will say, well, they're just not out there. That is not true. You're just choosing not to look for them, not to recruit them, because I have lots of very bright, educated friends who have masters and doctorates and PhDs, and they're like, you can give me a job and you can do well. I'll take that 6-7 figure job any day. So I think that there is a mindset and there are structures. I think that I could go on and on, but there's just the historic structures of inequality that are pervasive, that are so ingrained into our society that people don't even recognize them. So that goes to the unconscious bias. Like, I'm a black person and I like people and I have a black friend. However, when you look to your left and your right, when you go into the boardroom, everybody who you've hired is white. Now, is that by design? Is that accident? Is that because you're a bad person? No, but because we have these structures of inequality that are so ingrained into our system that we say, oh, it's based upon merit. Can that person do the job? Yes. But do they have the degree from Harvard and PhD? And that's the only place we're going to look for talent? Well, you have to really think about that. And it might be black folks from Harvard with a PhD, but if you change the standards, you look around, you think about things differently, you create the ability to problem solve in a way that breaks down the barriers but accomplishes the goals. That's one of the ways. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges, is just the inability of so many people to see the structural inequalities that have been built up over centuries.
And that's based upon recruitment, like how we're seeing who's out there, talent.
Right. Right. Now, Naomi, you've held this position at Northeastern, Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Was it the same title, same position? Or Northeastern
Oh, no.
University?
Everyone has had different titles. I've had so many different
Right, but
roles.
but the same job description, you would say, same concept of being that kind of.
No, all of
No?
them have had a thread. So when I worked at Northeastern University, I came into that job originally as the assistant director of the Office of Affirmative Action, Equal Opportunity, and Diversity. And so
Okay.
it was, when the office was originally affirmative action, and the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion is constantly evolving, constantly changing. Every time that there is an incident or something that is happening in the world, where there's always an opportunity to flex, to assess the situation, to pivot, and to say, are we doing things the right way? So when I started out, that was over 20 years ago, Dania, when I first joined Northeastern University. It was literally 1999, November, when I walked into that job. And I was hired for my legal expertise to be the compliance person. So I was looking mostly at allegations. My job there had three components. I would look at allegations of discrimination and harassment, and I would investigate them. And then I would issue findings and work with legal counsel to address situations like that, often working with, cases that went to the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. So I did case management, did lots and lots of training. So I trained, probably saw you in one of the trainings, because we tried to train.
Yes, that's right. We did.
And I would do thousands and thousands of training, and mostly in the area of prevention of sexual harassment, because that was a real big area. And I think especially in the athletic department, but all over campus, but also in just, management and diversity and inclusion and affirmative action and all that. And then the third compliance area that I managed was doing an affirmative action plan. And that was really looking at whether legally we were doing what we needed to do with respect to recruitment, retention, and management of our paying people, pay equity, terminations, all of that. And so that was a statistical analysis that was a report card for the university on diversity and equity and inclusion. So
can I ask you a question?
So over 20 years.
Oh, go ahead.
Hold on. Over 20 years of being mindful of these issues in the workplace, in America. Have we moved the needle in 20 years? Like, in your assessment, has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Is it different issues, or is it the same thing with different titles? Is it the same thing with different, you know what I mean? I want to know, in your experience, in 20 years, have we gotten better in the workplace?
I think it depends upon the workplace that you're in. I think that there are definitely workplaces that lean in, that understand the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sadly, in this country, if it's not driven by economics or finances, often people in position do not see the value. But I think
that's right.
More and more people globally understand that if you do not get diversity, equity, and inclusion correct, you will lose money. And that's the incentive for most people. Sadly, that moral imperative has, in my opinion, has been really challenging. And I think as Americans, we often have short-term memories. I was talking to a colleague of mine who was outraged. She says, I just outraged that people are all of a sudden, because Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were murdered within the last year, that everybody is like, oh my God, let's put money, let's put time, let's put effort, let's make this a priority of our organization. When for the last 400 years, that was my point.
Has
been a problem.
Yes, and your position has been popping up all over in so many businesses, at so many universities, in so many different departments now within the universities are having their representative. Right. So you're right. As of late, I guess the unrest over
George Floyd,
people are now making this a point of emphasis, and I don't necessarily think it's money anymore. It's more like
It is money.
normalcy. It's more like this is becoming a norm. We have to pay attention to how we're running our business when it comes to diversity in particular. I think now it's now all of a sudden become something that you have to have within your organizational structure.
Unfortunately,
And it wasn't like that before.
Skeptic in me still believes that it is driven by money because people are putting pressure on corporations. And if people are going to spend their money with you, then that's the motivation. So when people can be morally outraged by the death of George Floyd and seeing him killed publicly and saying, if you are, for example, Publix, and you're supporting January 6th, we're not going to spend our money with you. And that impacts the bottom line. And so I think at the end of the day, a lot of it still has to do with money that people.
And for universities as well. Would you think money?
I think it's all interconnected because look at the NBA.
Right. I was going to go there. Come on.
Your son. I mean, but it was because of the stance that individuals took. And it wasn't the moral imperative. It was going to shut down the NBA. I look at tennis too. I'm a huge tennis fan. Look at Naomi Osaka. Naomi Osaka shut down. She shut down the US Open. That's not about moral imperative. That's about money. And she got people's attention because if she didn't play, if she wasn't going to, then people would lose millions and millions of dollars.
That's right.
Wow,
you got it.
This is really, really important. We really care about you now. And so I think I'm a skeptic, but I've been doing this for 20 years. And like I said, it's in my blood forever. And, I do the readings on critical race theory. And if you read critical race theory, it follow the money.
Yeah.
I wish it was a moral imperative. I wish I could be, because look at what's happening at the Capitol right now. Look at the impeachment trials. Where is morality in that? When you can see a hate crime happen before your eyes, and you see this whole party of individuals who will not vote to hold somebody accountable who is engaging in hate crimes, killing people. Where is the morality?
And look at the jurors. They were the victims that day, and they're allowing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where? Hello.
Very true. Very true.
So that's just my opinion.
No.
But we need your perspective. We need your perspective. We've had a lot of guests on the show that had a lot of different perspective, and each time Donna and I learned something different.
And afterwards we go, can you believe that?
Yeah, from your lens, you're really opening their eyes to America, and it's racial issues have a lot to do with money, and attention to racial issues presently has a lot to do with the bottom line.
And that, it's, what is the more we understand, the more we can change. Ignorance will keep us in the dark. So it's okay. It's okay to hear this. It's a little, we don't really want to hear this. It's show me the money. We don't really want to hear this part of it, but it's the reality of it. You have it.
Now, as a mother, tell us a little bit about, Benjamin growing up and how you had conversations with him about race, or any situations, or didn't, or did he just lived it, right? Or were there any situations where you really had to have that conversation, whether it was driving and, being respectful to police officers once you got stopped, or handle any situations where he was a minority in a group and was, looked upon different? What kind of conversations did you have with your son? Because I know mothers listening want to know how we did it, and what can they take away from our experience?
Well, because my son was born right before I joined the staff at Northeastern, he went to the Russell J. Call Daycare Center on site. I mean, he was practically raised at Northeastern, did all that. And the first time I had a conversation with him, he was between the ages of 2 and 3 years old, probably 3 years old. And I bought him a board book about Dr. Martin Luther King. And I remember he had a friend who, was Russell J. Call was very diverse. And he had his best friend was Zach, and he was this blonde hair, blue eyed kid who looked like something off of the Dutch boy can. And I read him the book about Dr. Martin Luther King because I thought it was important for him. And he, was small. So he stood, right next to me when I was sitting down. And I could see his face dropping as I'm reading the story about, the civil rights movement. And he said, Mom, does that mean that I couldn't play with Zach? And I said, yeah.
Oh.
And his whole world was just crushed. I was like, all right, at age 2, I'm crushing your whole existence. And, but it gave him a perspective early on. And as, there's pros and cons, but he also went to a school. He went to the Park School. So he was often the only Black male. And, from nursery up through 9th grade. And, his mother's a diversity expert. I'm talking to him every single day. Be careful. Think about this. Think about how you represent, think about what you're saying, how you do. And I remember even having the interview for the school. And I said, I just don't want my son having Mother Africa on his back just because he's the, one of the few Black kids. You want him to have a good education, but you don't want him to bear the responsibility for all of, Black people in the whole wide world because he doesn't represent, and he's 4 years old. So comes his back. So yeah, the conversation started early, and they were much and often, and they were daily. And when he got to be around the age where he could start dating, being in a predominantly white school, the options were very slim. And I would have the Emmett Till conversation every single day. I was like, look, the story of Emmett Till. Let's look at the pictures. Let's hear the story. Let's understand Mommy has a visceral fear of this bad thing happening to you. So be mindful of that when you're picking who you want to date. But of course, he loves who he wants to love, and he dates who he wants to date. Yeah. And so, and we even went to the Museum of African American History and Culture, and we went to the exhibit where the original casket for Emmett Till sits.
Oh.
And we went and we paid our respects to Emmett Till. And I was like, you really need, and we cried together, and he comforted his mother. But I said, you need to know this story. You need to know your history. You need to, and so poor thing, every day. Every day is a picture.
It's unfortunate, but necessary.
Necessary. I have a question for you. Have you heard of the Whitney Museum?
Yes.
You have?
I knew she would have. If anybody would have known about that, because it would be Naomi, definitely.
Have you been?
No.
Gotta go.
Yeah. There's another good one. The EJI, Equal Justice Institute, is another one that I would strongly, in Montgomery, Alabama. So a couple years ago, I went down. A must-see is the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But, oh my goodness, I'm gonna blank on his name. Stevenson. Oh gosh. I forget his first name, but he's an attorney who created the Equal Justice Institute, which represents criminals who are on death row. And he has spent 30 years as an attorney. I feel like nothing compared to him, because he spent the last 30 years representing prisoners on death row. And then he created a museum and a memorial. So the museum is shows the connection, that the immediate and direct connection between slavery and the ending of slavery and the immediate creation of the criminal justice system, and how basically we just switched from, Black men being enslaved to, incarcerating them. And it shows how the criminal justice system is just an extension of slavery and the astronomical numbers. And his museum does an extraordinary job of that. But also he has created what's sometimes referred to as the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. Have you heard of that? And it's amazing. It basically looks like a memorial of upside down headstones that are made out of iron, and they have all of the counties in the South where thousands of Black people were hung, and it has the names of the Black people who were lynched, and the counties that they were in, and the reasons that they were lynched. And it's probably the most powerful, painful, impactful thing, but it tells an important part of our history that we need to know. And
Well, and it's not only that you need to know. This is, Black history is American history.
yes.
We all need to understand the history. And that Whitney Museum is like very powerful for me. It changed my life, going there. That plantation from the viewpoint of the slave was like, oh, and the little children. Oh,
yeah. Oh, we have a long way to go, I guess.
Wait, there's something I want to talk about. Something else I would like to ask you about too. But what was that again? Equal Justice
Brian
Institute.
Stevenson. Brian Stevenson is a Harvard-trained attorney who has created the Equal Justice Institute, the museum, the Equal Justice Museum. I might be saying it wrong, and then the Lynching Memorial.
We have to get someone from there.
Oh,
can you connect us? Can you connect us?
Get Brian. Well, you can call him.
Well, or just someone from there that can, help. Because the more we know, the better.
Absolutely,
definitely. Well, Naomi, thank you so very much for your time this evening. I think this was a very enlightening conversation. Donna, we have to go.
One more second.
Oh.
I just have one question for you. Are you aware of the statistic of Black women and girls missing in this country?
No.
50 to 75,000.
That's scary.
Yeah.
That's very scary, very sad.
Well, I think we all should be.
Show.
Yep. I think it's
more. The bottom of that too.
Yeah.
Right? We want to get to the bottom of that too. That's Donna's. She wants to get to the bottom of it. So we'll definitely do so.
Where are they?
And thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
And this has been a great conversation.
Thank
we'll send you a shirt. Mothers Against Racism. Please support us.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, it was great. And go Husky.
Go Husky.
Bye, Naomi. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. All right.
Take care. Talk to you again soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.